Sometimes the worst mistake of your life turns out to be the doorway to the miracle you never saw coming. The first thing Caleb Thornton heard was a scream. Not a scream of danger. Not a scream of pain. A scream of shock. The sound cut across the quiet shoreline of Lake Evergreen on a warm Saturday afternoon and froze him in place. 1 second, he was calling for his daughter's missing golden retriever. The next, he found himself standing in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Caleb had spent most of his 39 years learning how to stay calm. Life had given him plenty of reasons to practice. Losing his wife 6 years earlier had changed everything. Since then, every morning started before sunrise. Every dollar was carefully counted. Every decision revolved around one person, his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. The two of them lived in a modest lakeside cottage on the outskirts of town, where Caleb repaired fishing boats and pontoon motors for a living. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't profitable, but it was honest work. And for Caleb, honesty mattered more than comfort. "Dad, I think Buddy went this way," Emma shouted from a gravel path near the docks. Caleb adjusted his baseball cap and followed her voice. Their golden retriever had slipped his leash 20 minutes earlier after spotting a squirrel near the marina. Since then, father and daughter had been searching every trail, dock, and boathouse along the shoreline. The late afternoon sun reflected off the water like scattered pieces of gold. Small waves tapped gently against wooden pilings. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine trees and fresh lake water through the air. Everything felt peaceful, until it wasn't. Buddy suddenly appeared from behind an abandoned boathouse, barking excitedly. "Buddy," Emma laughed. "Come back here." The dog darted around the corner. Caleb followed without thinking. He rounded the side of the structure and immediately stopped. A woman stood inside the partially open boathouse near a changing area reserved for kayakers. She had clearly been changing out of wet clothes after an accident on the lake. Caleb instantly realized he had walked into a private moment completely by accident. He turned away so quickly he nearly lost his balance. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I should have knocked." But the damage had already been done. The woman gasped in surprise. A security guard stationed nearby rushed toward the entrance. Then another. Within seconds, the quiet shoreline transformed into confusion. "Step away from the building, sir," one guard ordered. Caleb raised both hands slightly. "It was an accident." "Dad," Emma's frightened voice trembled behind him. Caleb glanced back and saw his daughter standing near Buddy, her face pale with confusion. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "Everything's okay." But it didn't look okay. The guards exchanged suspicious looks. A few people nearby had already stopped to watch. Whispers began spreading faster than facts ever could. The woman inside the boathouse remained out of sight now, but Caleb could feel the weight of everyone's assumptions settling around him. One guard asked for identification. Another questioned why he was there. Caleb answered calmly. He never raised his voice, never argued, never became defensive, because deep down, he knew something most people forgot during moments like this. The truth didn't become more true just because someone shouted louder. Then, for the first time, the woman stepped forward. Victoria Kensington. Though Caleb had no idea who she was. To him, she was simply a stranger whose privacy he had accidentally interrupted. She studied him carefully. The security team seemed ready to assume the worst. The crowd looked eager to believe it. Yet the man standing before her didn't act like someone hiding something. His eyes stayed focused on his daughter. His concern remained entirely on keeping Emma calm. "Ma'am," Caleb said quietly. "I'm truly sorry." Victoria didn't answer right away. Something about his voice caught her attention. Not confidence. Not fear. Something rarer. Dignity. Then Emma stepped forward and grabbed her father's hand. "My dad wasn't trying to do anything wrong," she whispered. The shoreline fell strangely quiet. Victoria looked from the little girl to the man beside her. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she suddenly found herself wondering if everyone standing there, including herself, might be judging the wrong person. The crowd eventually dispersed, but small towns had a way of holding onto stories long after the facts disappeared. By sunset, people were no longer talking about an accident near the boathouse. They were talking about a man who had supposedly crossed a line. By the following morning, the story had already changed 3 times. Caleb Thornton learned that lesson before breakfast. He stopped at Miller's Grocery just after 7 o'clock to pick up milk, eggs, and a loaf of wheat bread. The familiar bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Usually, 3 or 4 people would greet him by name. Usually, someone would ask about a boat engine or a fishing trip. Today felt different. Conversations lowered when he walked by. I shifted away. A woman near the produce section whispered something to her husband. Caleb pretended not to notice. Sometimes dignity meant refusing to participate in a conversation that was happening about you instead of with you. He paid for his groceries, thanked the cashier, and headed home. Emma sat at the kitchen table coloring a picture of Buddy while morning sunlight streamed through the curtains. The old ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The smell of coffee filled the small cottage. Are people still upset? Emma asked quietly. Caleb set the grocery bags on the counter and offered a gentle smile. Some people are confused. But you did not do anything wrong. I know. Then why are they acting strange? Caleb paused. Questions from children often carried more wisdom than answers from adults. He knelt beside her chair. Because sometimes people decide what happened before they know what happened. Emma thought about that. That does not seem fair. No, Caleb said softly. It usually is not. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Kensington sat alone in a private suite overlooking the lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the water below, but she barely noticed the view. A tablet rested on the desk in front of her. Security footage from the marina played again. And again. And again. She watched Caleb round the corner chasing a dog. Watched him freeze. Watched him immediately turn away. Watched him apologize before anyone had even spoken. The footage lasted less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds that completely contradicted the story already spreading through town. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Her security director stood nearby. It was clearly accidental, he said. Yes. Would you like me to issue a statement? Victoria remained silent. Outside, a sailboat drifted across the lake beneath a pale blue sky. Not yet, she finally replied. Why not? Victoria looked back at the screen. Because I want to understand something first. The director frowned. Understand what? Why he never tried to defend himself. Back at the marina, Caleb spent the afternoon repairing the engine of a 22-foot fishing boat. Grease stained his hands. The radio played softly in the background. Work usually helped clear his mind. Today it did not. Around noon, his longtime friend Rick stopped by the shop carrying 2 cups of coffee. You should do something, Rick said. Caleb accepted the coffee. About what? About all this. Rick gestured vaguely toward town. People are talking. People always talk. This is different. Caleb tightened a bolt and returned to the engine. Maybe. Rick shook his head. You could call a lawyer. No, you could demand an apology. No, you could tell everyone what really happened. Caleb finally looked up. The people who know me already know. The old mechanic stared at him for several seconds. You are either the wisest man I know or the most stubborn. A faint smile appeared on Caleb's face. Maybe both. That evening, Victoria found herself driving through town alone. No assistance. No security convoy. No media team. Just a rental SUV and a growing sense of curiosity she could not explain. As she passed Main Street, she noticed something unexpected. Nearly every person she spoke with had a kind word about Caleb Thornton. The waitress at the diner praised him. The librarian praised him. The elderly couple at the hardware store praised him. Nobody described him as wealthy. Nobody described him as important. But everyone described him as good. And for the first time since the incident, Victoria began to feel something she had not anticipated. Regret. Because the more she learned about Caleb Thornton, the harder it became to ignore a simple truth. The man everyone was whispering about was not the man she had seen in that boathouse. The following week brought clear skies, calm water, and a growing discomfort that Victoria Kensington could no longer ignore. Most people spent their mornings checking stock reports, business forecasts, or news headlines. Victoria found herself doing something entirely different. She was asking questions about a boat mechanic. At first, she told herself it was simple curiosity. Then she realized curiosity did not explain why she kept returning to the subject. Every answer seemed to reveal another piece of a man who did not fit the story she had been given. On Tuesday morning, she visited the town diner before sunrise. The place smelled of fresh coffee, buttered toast, and maple syrup. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, while sunlight slowly brightened the windows. Victoria sat alone in a corner booth wearing a simple jacket and baseball cap. Few people recognized one of the wealthiest women in the country sitting among truck drivers and fishermen. "You are not from around here," the waitress said with a friendly smile while refilling her coffee. "Just visiting. Business." Victoria glanced out the window. "Something like that." The waitress nodded. "Well, if you need help with anything, ask Caleb Thornton. That man knows everybody." Victoria looked up. "You know him?" The waitress laughed softly. "Everybody knows Caleb." "What kind of person is he?" The woman seemed surprised by the question. "The kind who fixes things without sending a bill." Victoria listened carefully. "A few years ago, my husband lost his job," the waitress continued. "Our truck broke down. We could not afford repairs. Caleb worked on it all weekend and never charged us a dime." She smiled at the memory. "Would not even let us pay for parts." Later that afternoon, Victoria stopped by the town library. The elderly librarian spoke about Caleb helping organize reading programs for local children. At the hardware store, she learned he regularly repaired mobility ramps for senior citizens. At the marina, she heard stories about free engine repairs for struggling fishermen during difficult seasons. The pattern never changed. Nobody described Caleb as extraordinary. Nobody called him a hero. Yet every story carried the same quiet truth. He gave more than he received. He helped without keeping score. And he never asked for recognition. Victoria had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something. Contracts, partnerships, opportunities, access, influence. Caleb Thornton seemed to want none of those things. That alone made him unusual. By Wednesday evening, she found herself parked across the street from his small workshop near the lake. The building was modest. White paint peeled from the wooden siding. A faded sign hung above the entrance. The parking lot contained more fishing boats than luxury vehicles. Through the open garage door, she watched Caleb work. He stood beside an old pontoon engine, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands. Nothing about him suggested ambition beyond providing for his daughter and serving his community. Yet there was something steady about him. Something that reminded Victoria of values she had not seen in years. She remained in her vehicle longer than she intended. Then she noticed movement. Emma appeared carrying 2 paper bags. The little girl walked into the workshop with a bright smile. Caleb immediately stopped working. His face softened. Victoria watched father and daughter sit together on overturned toolboxes while sharing sandwiches. They laughed about something. Emma pointed toward the lake. Caleb listened as if her words were the most important thing in the world. The scene lasted only a few minutes. Yet it stayed with Victoria long after she drove away. That night, she sat alone in her lakeside suite, staring at the city lights reflecting across the water. Her assistant called with updates about acquisitions and meetings. Victoria barely heard any of it. "Are you still there?" her assistant finally asked. "Yes." "You sound distracted." Victoria looked toward the dark horizon. "Have you ever met someone who makes you question your first impression?" Silence lingered briefly on the line. "More than once," her assistant replied. Victoria ended the call and walked toward the window. Below, the lake rested beneath the moonlight, calm and silver. For days she had searched for evidence that Caleb Thornton was the man everyone assumed he was. Instead, she had discovered something entirely different. She had discovered a man whose reputation had been built quietly over years of kindness. And for the first time since that afternoon at the boathouse, Victoria realized she no longer wanted information. She wanted a chance to tell him she was sorry. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and a gentle breeze rolling across Lake Evergreen. The town moved at its usual pace. Fishermen prepared their boats. Shop owners unlocked their doors. Children hurried toward school buses. Yet for Victoria Kensington, nothing felt ordinary. For 3 days she had gathered pieces of a story she never expected to find. Every conversation had pointed in the same direction. Every person had painted the same picture. Caleb Thornton was not a man who demanded respect. He simply earned it. And now she found herself standing outside his workshop with her hand resting on the door handle, feeling strangely nervous. It was a feeling she rarely experienced. Billion-dollar negotiations did not intimidate her. National television interviews did not unsettle her. Yet the thought of apologizing to a humble boat mechanic somehow did. Through the open garage door, she could hear tools clinking softly against metal. The scent of engine oil mixed with fresh lake air drifted across the parking lot. Victoria took a slow breath and stepped inside. Caleb was bent over an outboard motor, studying a diagram beside him. He looked up when he heard footsteps approaching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of distant gulls echoed from the shoreline. Sunlight filtered through the workshop windows and painted bright lines across the concrete floor. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "Hello, Caleb." He wiped his hands with a clean shop rag. "Good morning." His voice carried no resentment, no accusation, no bitterness. That somehow made her apology even harder. Victoria shifted slightly. "I owe you something." Caleb tilted his head. "Do you?" "An apology." The words hung quietly between them. Caleb studied her expression for a moment before setting the rag aside. "You do not owe me anything." Victoria almost laughed at the response. Most people would disagree. Most people were not there. She looked down briefly. "I reviewed the security footage." Caleb nodded once. "I figured you might. It showed exactly what happened." "Then you know it was an accident?" "Yes." A few seconds passed. Victoria expected him to say more. To mention the rumors. To mention the embarrassment. To mention the way people had judged him. Instead, he simply returned his attention to the engine beside him. The reaction caught her completely off guard. "That is it?" she asked. Caleb glanced up. "What do you mean? You are not angry?" "No, you are not upset?" "Not really." Victoria folded her arms. "People have been talking about you for days." "People talk." "You could have demanded a public correction." Caleb smiled faintly. "Why?" "Because your reputation matters." He tightened a bolt carefully before answering. "My reputation is not built in 1 week." The simplicity of the statement settled heavily in the room. Outside, a boat horn sounded across the lake. Inside, Victoria found herself struggling to respond. In her world, image was everything. Public perception could influence markets. Headlines could move millions of dollars. Yet Caleb spoke as if none of that mattered. As if character existed independently of opinion. "I do not understand how you stay so calm," she admitted. Caleb leaned against the workbench. "I spent a long time learning that not every misunderstanding needs a fight." "That sounds difficult." "Sometimes." He glanced toward a framed photograph sitting near the office doorway. Victoria noticed a younger Caleb standing beside his wife and a much smaller Emma. "Life teaches you what is worth holding on to," he said quietly. Victoria followed his gaze and immediately understood. The room seemed softer somehow after that. Less like a workshop and more like a place where memories lived alongside engines and tools. Before she could respond, a cheerful voice burst through the doorway. "Dad, I finished my science project." Emma hurried inside, carrying a poster board nearly as wide as her shoulders. She stopped when she noticed Victoria. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed her face. Then something surprising happened. Emma smiled. "Hi." Victoria smiled back. "Hello, Emma." The little girl looked between them. "Are you friends now?" Caleb chuckled softly. Victoria felt warmth spread across her face. Neither adult answered immediately. Emma considered their silence and nodded as if she had solved the mystery herself. "Good," she announced. "Because Dad says life is easier when people stop assuming the worst about each other." Victoria looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at his daughter. And for the first time since that afternoon at the boathouse, all three of them shared the same small smile. After that morning, something unexpected began to happen. What started as a simple apology slowly turned into a routine neither Caleb nor Victoria planned. Every few days, Victoria found a reason to stop by the workshop. Sometimes she brought coffee from the diner. Sometimes she claimed she wanted recommendations for local attractions. Sometimes she simply arrived and asked how business was going. Caleb never questioned her reasons. He welcomed her with the same quiet courtesy he showed everyone else. Summer settled comfortably over Lake Evergreen. The mornings arrived bright and cool. The afternoons shimmered beneath endless blue skies. The evenings painted the water in shades of gold and amber. As the days passed, Victoria found herself spending less time inside luxury suites and more time near the shoreline. One afternoon, she sat on an overturned bucket outside the workshop while Emma carefully taught her how to skip stones across the lake. "You have to throw it flat," Emma explained seriously. "Like this." The stone bounced 4 times before disappearing into the water. Victoria tried. Her stone sank immediately. Emma burst into laughter. "That was terrible." Victoria laughed too. "Thank you for your honesty." Nearby, Caleb worked on a fishing boat engine while secretly enjoying the sound of both voices. It had been years since the workshop felt so alive. For Emma, Victoria quickly became someone special. Not because of money, not because of status, simply because she listened. She attended Emma's youth soccer game one Saturday morning. She helped with a science project another afternoon. She even sat through a 40-minute explanation about Buddy's favorite tennis ball without once checking her phone. Small things. Yet children notice small things better than adults ever did. One evening, as the sun settled behind the distant hills, the three of them shared hamburgers from a roadside diner overlooking the lake. The air smelled of fresh grass and charcoal grills. Boats drifted lazily across the water. For a brief moment, everything felt surprisingly normal. "You know," Emma said while sipping a milkshake, "you do not seem rich." Victoria nearly choked on her drink. Caleb laughed openly for perhaps the first time all week. "Emma," he said gently. "What?" Emma shrugged. "Rich people in movies are always grumpy." Victoria smiled. "I will take that as a compliment." The little girl nodded seriously. It was. The comment stayed with Victoria long after dinner ended. Nobody in town seemed interested in her wealth because nobody knew about it. For once, people responded to her as a person rather than a headline. The feeling was strangely refreshing. Yet secrets rarely stayed hidden forever. 3 days later, Caleb stopped by Miller's grocery after work. The afternoon rush had faded. A few customers wandered the aisles while a local news channel played quietly on a television mounted above the checkout area. Caleb pushed a cart toward the dairy section when a familiar face suddenly appeared on the screen. He froze. The anchor was discussing a major corporate acquisition. Behind her appeared a photograph. Victoria Kensington stood on a stage surrounded by reporters and executives. A headline stretched across the bottom of the screen. "One of America's most influential business leaders announces new expansion project." Caleb stared for several seconds. Another image appeared. Then another. Corporate headquarters. Private aircraft. Financial awards. Billion-dollar valuations. The woman who sat beside Emma skipping stones. The woman who drank coffee at his workshop. The woman who laughed at terrible stone-skipping attempts. She was not simply successful. She was one of the most powerful business figures in the country. "You did not know?" the cashier asked from behind the counter. Caleb slowly shook his head. "No. Everybody else around here figured it out last week." Caleb looked back at the screen. Suddenly, several conversations made more sense. The private security team. The luxury vehicles that occasionally appeared near town. The confidential phone calls she sometimes stepped away to answer. Yet strangely, the discovery did not change how he felt about her. It only raised a new question. Why had she hidden it? That evening, Victoria arrived at the workshop carrying 2 cups of coffee. She immediately noticed something different. Caleb stood outside watching the sunset with his hands in his pockets. His expression remained calm, but thoughtful. "Everything okay?" she asked. Caleb accepted the coffee. "I saw you on television today." For the first time since arriving in Lake Evergreen, Victoria Kensington looked genuinely nervous. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back toward the lake. The evening sunlight reflected across the water in long golden ribbons. For the first time since arriving in Lake Evergreen, she seemed uncertain about what to say next. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "I figured that too. You are not surprised?" "I am surprised by how much money you have." A faint smile crossed his face. "I am not surprised by who you are." The answer lingered between them. Victoria looked away, suddenly grateful for the fading sunlight that concealed the emotion in her eyes. During her career, she had been praised for intelligence, ambition, and leadership. Very few people had ever complimented her character. The following week changed everything. News travels quickly in small towns, but it travels even faster in corporate circles. Within days, photographs surfaced online showing Victoria spending time near the marina. One image captured her talking with Caleb outside the workshop. Another showed her attending Emma's soccer game. Neither photograph revealed anything improper. Yet speculation exploded anyway. Business blogs published articles. Financial commentators shared opinions. Social media users created theories. The headlines became increasingly ridiculous. Billionaire executive linked to small-town boat mechanic. Mystery man appears beside corporate titan. Investors question executives' recent distractions. Victoria ignored most of it. Caleb ignored all of it. Unfortunately, not everyone did. One afternoon, Victoria arrived at her temporary office suite overlooking the lake and found 3 senior executives waiting for her. Their expressions revealed concern before a single word was spoken. "This has become a problem," one of them said. Victoria sat calmly. What has? The attention. Another executive slid a tablet across the table. Dozens of articles filled the screen. Investors are asking questions. Victoria scanned the headlines without emotion. Let them ask. You do not understand. Actually, she replied, I understand perfectly. The room fell quiet. The oldest executive cleared his throat. People are concerned that someone may be taking advantage of your goodwill. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. You mean Caleb? Nobody answered. Their silence answered for them. Across town, Caleb faced a different version of the same judgment. Reporters occasionally appeared near the workshop. Curious strangers drove by. One local resident even suggested he must be pursuing Victoria for financial reasons. Caleb simply returned to work. Every morning, he unlocked the shop. Every afternoon, he repaired engines. Every evening, he helped Emma with homework. The routine never changed. One Friday afternoon, a luxury sedan stopped outside the workshop. A sharply dressed man stepped out carrying an expensive briefcase. Caleb immediately knew he was not there to repair a boat. Mr. Thornton? That is me. I represent several interested parties. Caleb almost laughed. That sounds serious. The man remained professional. We would appreciate it if you created some distance between yourself and Ms. Kensington. Caleb studied him carefully. Why? To avoid misunderstandings. Whose misunderstandings? The representative hesitated. Investors, shareholders, media organizations. Caleb wiped his hands on a shop towel and looked toward the lake. The water sparkled beneath a cloudless sky. Children laughed somewhere near the docks. Life continued exactly as it had before the conversation began. Tell your interested parties something for me, Caleb said calmly. What would that be? Friendship does not become less honest because one person has money. The representative had no response. That evening, Victoria received a report describing the entire encounter. She read every word in silence. When she finished, she stared out the window for a very long time. The city lights across the lake began to appear one by one as darkness settled over the shoreline. Most people would have become angry. Most people would have defended themselves publicly. Most people would have used the attention to gain something. Caleb had done none of those things. He had simply remained himself. And somewhere deep inside, Victoria realized the gap between their worlds was far larger than wealth. One world measured success through influence and numbers. The other measured it through integrity. The realization both comforted her and frightened her. Because for the first time in many years, she cared deeply about losing someone whose respect could never be purchased. The pressure continued to grow over the following days. Reporters called more often. Articles multiplied. Strangers suddenly seemed interested in a man they had ignored for years. Caleb Thornton never wanted attention, and now attention appeared to be following him everywhere. One Monday morning, he arrived at the workshop before sunrise. The lake was still dark. Mist drifted across the water like a thin silver blanket. Normally, the quiet gave him peace. Today, it gave him time to think. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. On his desk sat a stack of unpaid invoices, repair estimates, and utility bills. Business had slowed noticeably since the media frenzy began. Some customers felt uncomfortable. Others assumed his life had changed overnight. Neither assumption helped keep the lights on. Caleb stared at the numbers for a long moment. Then he made a decision. Later that afternoon, Victoria arrived carrying coffee and her usual warm smile. The smile disappeared the moment she saw his expression. What happened? She asked. Caleb motioned toward two chairs outside overlooking the lake. They sat together beneath the shade of an old oak tree. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Caleb looked toward the water. I think we need some distance. Victoria felt the words like a sudden gust of cold wind. Distance? For a while. Why? Caleb took a slow breath. Because this is becoming bigger than either of us. Victoria shook her head immediately. No. Other people are making it bigger. That does not change the reality. She looked at him carefully. This is about the investors, is it not? Caleb smiled sadly. Partly. Then let me handle them. You should not have to. I want to. Caleb remained silent. The quiet stretched between them. Somewhere across the lake, a boat engine hummed softly in the distance. Victoria's voice became gentler. You are pushing me away to protect me. Caleb looked down. Maybe. That is not your responsibility. Maybe not. His eyes moved toward the workshop behind them. But protecting the people I care about has always felt like my responsibility. The words struck deeper than he intended. Victoria suddenly understood something she had missed before. Caleb was not stepping away because he cared less. He was stepping away because he cared more. That realization hurt far worse. Over the next several weeks, Caleb kept his promise. He stopped answering media requests entirely. He declined every interview offer. When television crews appeared near the marina, he quietly left through the back entrance. More importantly, he stopped calling Victoria. He stopped texting. He stopped finding reasons to cross paths with her. The absence created an emptiness neither expected. Emma noticed first. One evening, while helping her with homework, Caleb found her staring out the window. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I miss Victoria." Caleb swallowed. "Me too." Emma looked at him carefully. Children often see truths adults try to hide. "Then why are you letting her go?" Caleb had no easy answer. Across town, Victoria buried herself in work. Board meetings filled her calendar. Corporate events consumed her schedule. Yet nothing seemed to fill the space Caleb had left behind. Then another challenge appeared. The workshop's oldest service boat finally failed beyond repair. The vessel had been essential to Caleb's business for years. Replacing it would cost far more than he could comfortably afford. Instead of asking for help, Caleb quietly sold the restored fishing boat he had spent 2 years rebuilding. It had been his pride, his hobby, and his connection to countless memories on the lake. The sale solved the financial problem. It also broke Emma's heart. "You love that boat," she whispered after the buyer drove away. Caleb watched the empty trailer disappear down the road. Sometimes keeping something is less important than taking care of what matters most. Word of the sale eventually reached Victoria through a mutual friend. She sat alone in her office reading the message twice, then 3 times. The boat had never been about money. It represented years of work, patience, and healing after loss. And he had given it up without complaint, without asking anyone for help, without calling her. Victoria slowly lowered her phone and stared out the window. For the first time in her life, surrounded by wealth beyond imagination, she felt completely powerless. Because the only man she truly wanted beside her was the one person who refused to use her fortune for his own benefit. And in that moment, Victoria Kensington realized she was no longer afraid of public opinion. She was afraid of losing Caleb Thornton forever. Autumn arrived quietly in Lake Evergreen. The trees surrounding the shoreline shifted from deep green to shades of amber and gold. Cool winds swept across the water each morning, carrying the scent of pine and fallen leaves. Life moved forward, but for both Caleb and Victoria, something remained unfinished. Then, in early October, an invitation changed everything. Victoria had been selected to receive a National Humanitarian Leadership Award during one of the country's largest charity galas in Chicago. Business leaders, journalists, philanthropists, and public figures from across America would attend. The event would be broadcast live to millions. Normally, Victoria would have accepted the honor with a prepared speech and moved on. This time was different. For weeks, she had replayed the same memories in her mind. The boathouse, the rumors, the silence, the dignity Caleb carried through every misunderstanding. And she knew she could not stand on that stage without telling the truth. 3 days before the gala, Victoria drove back to Lake Evergreen. The afternoon sky hung low with silver clouds. She found Caleb at the marina helping an elderly fisherman repair a damaged motor. "Victoria," he said with genuine surprise. She stepped closer. "I need a favor." Caleb smiled faintly. "That sounds dangerous. Come to Chicago." He immediately shook his head. "No, you have not even heard why. Because I do not belong at events like that." Victoria folded her arms. "Neither did I once." Caleb laughed softly. "That is definitely not true." But Victoria's expression remained serious. "Please." Something in her voice stopped him. 2 days later, Caleb and Emma found themselves seated among hundreds of guests inside one of the most elegant ballrooms either of them had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Cameras lined the walls. Television crews moved carefully through the aisles. Emma stared wide-eyed at everything around her. "Dad," she whispered, "I think this room costs more than our entire town." Caleb almost smiled. "Probably." The ceremony progressed smoothly. Award after award was presented. Speeches filled the evening. Then Victoria Kensington's name was announced. Applause echoed throughout the ballroom as she stepped onto the stage. Dressed elegantly but simply, She stood beneath bright lights and accepted the award. For a moment, she looked out across the audience. Then she set the trophy aside. "Before I begin," she said calmly, "there is a story I need to tell." The room grew quiet. Television cameras focused on her. Journalists lifted their pens. Victoria took a slow breath. "Several months ago, I met a man in a small town beside a lake." Images appeared on giant screens behind her. Photographs of Lake Evergreen, the marina, the shoreline. "Most people know me as a businesswoman. What they do not know is that I made a serious mistake." A murmur moved through the audience. Victoria continued, "I allowed assumptions to speak louder than facts." The ballroom became still. She described the misunderstanding at the boathouse. She described the rumors that followed. Then she did something nobody expected. Security footage appeared on the screen. The entire incident played exactly as it happened. Caleb chasing a dog. Caleb immediately turning away. Caleb apologizing. Caleb protecting his daughter from the confusion around them. Nothing more. Nothing less. When the footage ended, silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Not uncertain silence. The kind of silence that appears when thousands of people realize they have witnessed the truth. Victoria's voice softened. "The world judged this man in less than 30 seconds. She paused. "And he never once demanded an apology." Across the ballroom, cameras turned toward Caleb. He looked completely uncomfortable with the attention. Victoria smiled through tears she could no longer hide. "The strongest person I have ever met was not a billionaire. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He was simply good." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the reporters stopped typing. The entire ballroom sat frozen in a rare moment of collective humility. Then one person stood and began clapping. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of people rose to their feet. The applause became thunderous. Caleb lowered his head, overwhelmed. Emma squeezed his hand tightly. On stage, Victoria looked directly at him. For the first time since that day by the lake, the truth stood fully revealed. And the room that once might have believed the worst now stood united in respect for a man who never stopped choosing dignity. 1 year later, Lake Evergreen looked much the same on the surface. The water still reflected the morning sun like scattered pieces of silver. Fishing boats still drifted quietly across the shoreline. The old marina still welcomed locals before sunrise. Yet beneath that familiar beauty, many lives had changed. The biggest change stood on the edge of the lake where Caleb's modest workshop once struggled to survive. The building had been expanded and renovated, but not with luxury in mind. Instead, it had become something far more meaningful. A large sign above the entrance now read Evergreen Skills Center. Inside, young men and women learned practical trades free of charge. Some studied marine engine repair. Others learned welding, woodworking, or mechanical maintenance. Many came from difficult backgrounds. Some had lost direction. Others simply needed someone to believe in them. Caleb believed in all of them. Every morning he arrived before the students. Every evening he stayed after they left. He taught patience before technique, character before success, responsibility before profit. The lessons reminded many people of the man himself. Quiet, consistent, honest. On a bright spring morning, the center celebrated its first graduating class. Families gathered beneath white tents near the shoreline. Children ran across the grass. Music drifted softly through the air. The scent of barbecue and fresh lemonade filled the breeze. Caleb stood near the docks speaking with one of the graduates when a familiar voice called his name. "You are working on your day off again." He turned and smiled. Victoria Kensington walked toward him carrying 2 cups of coffee. Some things had changed over the past year. Some things had not. She still brought coffee. He still pretended to be surprised. "Occupational hazard," Caleb replied. Victoria handed him a cup. "You know, most people eventually retire. Most people do not have teenagers trying to rebuild boat engines without reading instructions." Victoria laughed. The sound still felt like sunshine to him. Their relationship had grown slowly after the gala. Not through dramatic declarations. Not through headlines. Not through grand gestures. It grew through ordinary moments. Shared meals. Long conversations. Community projects. Quiet trust. The kind of foundation that lasts because it is built one day at a time. Nearby, Emma emerged from the center carrying a stack of certificates. At 10 years old, she had become the unofficial ambassador of the entire program. She greeted every student by name and treated every visitor like family. "We are ready," she announced proudly. Then she paused and looked at Victoria. "Can you help me with something?" "Of course." Emma handed her several certificates. Mom usually helped organize these. The words escaped naturally, effortlessly, innocently. For a second, nobody moved. Victoria looked down at the papers in her hands. Caleb looked toward the lake. Emma looked confused by their reactions. "What?" she asked. Victoria blinked rapidly and smiled. "Nothing, sweetheart." Emma shrugged and walked away, already distracted by another responsibility. But the moment remained. Quiet, gentle, perfect. Later that afternoon, the graduation ceremony concluded beneath clear blue skies. Students received certificates. Families celebrated. Photographs captured memories that would last for years. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Caleb and Victoria stood together near the same shoreline where everything had begun. The water rolled softly against the docks. Seagulls drifted overhead. The setting sun painted the lake gold. "Funny," Victoria said softly. "What is?" Caleb looked toward her. She smiled. "A year ago, this place gave us the worst misunderstanding of our lives." Caleb nodded. "And now?" Victoria watched Emma laughing with friends near the center. "Now it feels like the place where everything finally made sense." For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the water. Sometimes the most important moments arrive without applause, without headlines, without anyone else noticing. The world often celebrates power, wealth, and influence. Yet the greatest transformation in this story had come from something much quieter. A man who chose dignity when he could have chosen anger. A woman who chose truth when it would have been easier to remain silent. And a little girl whose heart remained open enough to recognize family before anyone else could. As evening settled across Lake Evergreen, the three of them walked together toward home. Behind them stood a center helping young people build new futures. Ahead of them waited a future they would build together. And somewhere beyond the fading sunlight, life offered one final reminder. Kindness is never wasted. Grace is never weakness. And sometimes the people who change our lives forever arrive through the very misunderstanding we wish had never happened at all.